Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn Spotlight session, one in a series of sessions that explore various topics in the field of domestic, sexual and gender-based abuse. I'm Sharon Gaynor, Training and Research Assistant with Haven Horizons. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Hilary McCollum to talk to us today. Dr. Hilary McCollum is a feminist researcher, campaigner and independent violence against women and girls consultant. Hilary currently chairs and was the quality assessor for domestic abuse related death reviews with the UK Home Office from 2022 to 2025. She uses creative activism to challenge myths around sexual and domestic abuse. While publishing fellow at the Seamus Heaney Centre, Queen's University in Belfast, she organised an international conference on the role of the arts in creating a world without violence against women and girls. And her memoir, Funny Peculiar, about surviving child sexual abuse was published in 2008 under the pseudonym Constance McCullagh for legal reasons. Hilary will now share some insight with us into her work.
Yeah, so thanks again for inviting me. So I'm going to be talking about my involvement with domestic abuse related death reviews. I have been the chair of 6 and report author for another 2. And as Sharon was saying, I was also an assessor for the Home Office for 3 years on other people's reviews. But I just thought I'd talk a little bit about when I first got involved with work on domestic homicide. So more than 30 years ago, the first domestic homicide I really became much aware of was the death of a woman called Vandana Patel. She was a 21-year-old woman. She was stabbed to death in the domestic violence unit in Stoke Newington Police Station. Stoke Newington is within the borough of Hackney, and I worked for Hackney Council Women's Unit. I was their lead on violence against women and girls. So that was the first kind of death that really, became something that I was really aware of. A few months later, I was involved in setting up an organisation called Justice for Women, which campaigned for changes to the way the state responded to domestic homicide, both in terms of for women who'd killed violent partners who'd been abusing them for years, and also for men who'd been abusing their partner for years and had gone on to kill them. So I've got quite a long history of working on domestic homicide, and I then went on to work on the Met Police domestic homicide panel before the introduction of statutory domestic homicide reviews. So I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about the legal context for reviews in England and Wales, and I'm talking about England and Wales because that's where I've done my work. So the reviews were established on a statutory basis in 2004 and came into force in 2011. They're now referred to as domestic abuse related death reviews, and so they're reviews of both domestic abuse related homicides and suicides, and you'll see that more and more of the reviews coming through are actually suicides. There are certainly more female victims are dying from suicide, domestic abuse related suicide, than domestic abuse related homicide now. I think that's possibly, it's not just now, that may even been the case earlier, but I don't think it's really was properly looked at in the past. But we'll maybe come back to that. And their overarching purpose is to learn from the death, to prevent similar deaths and improve responses to domestic abuse. So I've been involved with 8 reviews, 6 as chair, 2 as a report writer. 2 of those were familial homicides, and 6 were intimate partner homicides. Well, 6 intimate partner deaths, and I'll talk a bit more about that. So the first review that I did, I was the report writer, and Davina James Hanman was the chair. And some of you might know Davina. She is has incredible knowledge about domestic abuse and domestic homicide, and it was, it was a real privilege for me to be able to work with her on that first review. The victim was an older woman. She bled to death after a very violent rape by her son-in-law. And I think that's one also that I kind of wanted to draw attention to. I'm not going to talk about all of them in any detail, but I want to draw attention to that one because she was raped by her son-in-law, and it seemed that sexual abuse had been actually ongoing, but people weren't aware of it. But he had also was under investigation for raping a patient in a healthcare setting. He had previously had allegations against him in relation to sexual assaults on young women. And I want just to make the point of how different forms of violence against women and girls are connected in the lives of both victims and perpetrators. And I think certainly the domestic abuse sector within England and Wales, and I think in some areas, certainly the USA, was slow to fully absorb the degree to which other forms of violence against women and girls are relevant to domestic abuse. And I think that's something we still need to carry on working on. I don't know whether that's something that's better in the Republic of Ireland, but certainly in England and Wales, I think there's still need for big improvements. The other familial one that I did was a mother who was killed by her son during a psychotic episode. And then the other 6 have been intimate partner deaths. Of those intimate partner deaths, 2 didn't result in a conviction, and both of those were of women who had ongoing drug and alcohol issues, and it was not possible to prove in court that the death was caused by an assault rather than by a fall. So it was an issue to relate to evidence. Of the 6 intimate partner ones that I've done, 5 of them, the relationship had already ended. The couple had separated, so the woman was killed after separation, and then the 6th one, the woman was planning to end the relationship. I've not done any suicides. One of the intimate partner reviews that I did was homicide suicide. But as an assessor for the Home Office, quite a number of the assessments I did were of suicides. The only suicides that I have done, that I've read, have been where the suicide has been a man. It's been after he's killed his partner. I haven't had any suicides where a man was driven to suicide by his abusive partner. That doesn't mean there aren't any, but they certainly haven't come across. They haven't come across my desk. Overwhelmingly, the suicides have been of women who often have a history of previous experiences of violence and are amongst the most violent and most controlling perpetrators, and they often then go on to future partners. All the victims in the reviews I've done were female, all the perpetrators were male, but obviously that isn't always the case. And as I was saying, I've been an assessor for the Home Office. So just thought I'd talk about a few lessons that I feel I've learned in the course of the work that I've been doing. And I guess the first one I'd say is how important having a good chair is. I am disappointed to have to say that the quality of really quite a lot of the reviews that I looked at when I was at the working doing assessments for the Home Office, there were a lot of very poor quality reviews. There were also many excellent reviews, but the poor quality ones I feel are an insult to the victim and an insult to the family. Reviews where the analysis was inadequate, where key lines of inquiry that should have been pursued weren't pursued, where the understanding of equality and diversity issues was very limited, or reviews where research that applies to intimate partner violence was just transferred to familial violence without any justification for why it was relevant, without a kind of evidence base that would support it. So quality of chairing, I think, is absolutely crucial. And for me, the best chairs most of the best chairs that I've had were actually not from the statutory sector. There were people who'd worked in the domestic abuse sector or who were involved in policy work around domestic abuse. The next thing I'd say is that the involvement of friends and family is really helpful. I wouldn't say it's essential, but the reviews that have family and friends involved tend to be better. They tend to have more depth. You have a better understanding of the victim and the perpetrator's lives. It's not always possible to get their involvement, and obviously I wouldn't want friends and family to be pressurised into helping in reviews. In England and Wales, there is support through advocacy after fatal domestic abuse, and also through victim support for friends and families. And yeah, I think if Ireland was going to introduce a review process, having funded support available, advocacy support available for friends and families, is something that you should do. I guess one of the biggest lessons I've learned from chairing them is how difficult it is to get agencies to focus on the perpetrator. I will even tell them, right, we're just now going to spend the next half an hour talking about the perpetrator and what else agencies might have done to try and stop the behaviour so that it didn't lead to this death. And you'd be lucky if you get 2 or 3 minutes before we veer back to the victim. Agencies are much more comfortable talking about things that they could do to protect the victim, and not so comfortable about things that they might have done to disrupt the perpetrator's behaviour and to hold them to account. And I think that's a big issue. I think across different areas of the world, I think we are failing generally in many different countries to hold perpetrators effectively to account. Another learning I find, particularly from doing the reviews for the Home Office, is that actions aren't always implemented. And so you'll have a subsequent domestic homicide review in the same area come up with a similar recommendation that a previous homicide review had made in that area, but that action hadn't been properly implemented. So if there's only point doing learning if you actually then learn and apply the learning. And I guess the last thing I'd say in terms of lessons is self-care is important. I think it's hard work. I think anybody who's working in the domestic abuse sector, it is hard work. It's tough emotional work. And I think we all need to think about how we're looking after ourselves. So those are just some of my thoughts about lessons, but there are annual reviews of the domestic abuse related death reviews in England and Wales, and they're published on the Home Office website. So that's a link which people will then get, I guess, when that can hopefully be put up alongside the recording. There's also a really useful domestic homicide review library, and you can go in and search for reviews on particular issues. So you can look at ones that are featuring homelessness, or ones that featured mental health, or coercive control reviews, or so there's all sorts of criteria. So I think that's a really useful thing in terms of practice, that just as a resource for people to have. And I just wanted to kind of finish with some kind of final thoughts, maybe before we have a bit of discussion. And for me, a really big issue is about holding perpetrators to account. And I think we have to find much better ways of doing so, because we're now more than 50 years into the first refuges and first rape crisis centres. We're certainly in England and Wales more than 30 years into a lot of statutory agencies having policies around domestic abuse, and yet we are still really failing in holding perpetrators to account. And what I found, particularly from reading the suicides, was often they were the most violent and controlling perpetrators. And you really do get the sense that the victim killed themselves because they couldn't see any other way out. And the state needs to become much more effective at standing between victims and perpetrators. The state should be stronger than a perpetrator. You would think that would be self-evident, but at the minute, the state isn't really performing that function. With suicides, those often then become repeat perpetrators. Quite often they were already in another relationship by the time the review was being undertaken, and already violence was emerging in that relationship. And also we need to do better by repeat victims, and especially women who've been abused from childhood and maybe have also been in care. And that's not about victim blaming, it's about victim sensitivity and actually recognizing that some women have, because of their experiences of trauma, are more vulnerable to being abused and exploited. And it seems that the men who are most likely to abuse and exploit them look for those women and target those women. I've already mentioned the importance of recognising the connections between different forms of violence against women and girls, and that is definitely something I would emphasise. I think domestic abuse is a really, really significant issue, but it's not the only issue, and we do need to look at those connections. And I guess also the final thing I would say, you'll see if you do look at any of the kind of reviews of what's been going, what are the big issues of the previous year, mental health, drug and alcohol services are things that come up in a lot of reviews. Not all, but a significant number for both perpetrators and victims. And mental health and drug and alcohol services, certainly in England and Wales, I think, are not really playing the role that they could in intervening effectively in relation to domestic abuse. So I shall leave it there, and then we'll hopefully have some questions.